The Witch and the Definitely Dead Detective by Sadie Brent. Chapter 27, Decorations and Discoveries. Evie stepped back from the shop window, wiping her hands on her apron as she admired her handiwork. The Ghost of Christmas Past theme had finally come to life, a delicate balance of whimsy and nostalgia that she hoped would make Lizzie proud. Strings of tiny, warm white fairy lights framed the window, casting a soft glow over the scene she'd created. The display was built around a vintage clock she'd borrowed from the shop's decor, its hands frozen at midnight. Surrounding it was a cascade of pale, glittering fabrics evoking a dreamlike quality, interspersed with small glowing lanterns and faux snow dusted across the wooden base. She'd carefully arranged antique books and small vials of dried herbs to reflect Lizzie's love of natural remedies, their labels handwritten in her flowing script. Spinks sat nearby, his yellow eyes fixed on her as if critiquing the scene. "Well, what do you think?" she asked him. He flicked his tail and let out a soft, approving meow. Evie smiled, stepping closer to snap a photo with her phone. The decorations were the perfect distraction from the storm of thoughts that had been swirling in her head since finding the monkshood. She needed a plan, a way to move forward with the investigation without drawing too much attention or making herself look like she'd lost her mind. Involving Sheriff Joe seemed premature, even reckless, with what little concrete evidence she had. And while James's concerns about Marcellus lingered in her mind, something about Mabel's odd behavior kept pulling her focus back to the Coven leader. "Let's see how Hugo's display is coming along," she said to Spinks, grabbing her coat. "Maybe a change of scenery will help." With a last glance at her decorations, Evie headed out the door, her phone still clutched in her hand. Beans and Books was bustling with customers when Evie arrived, the rich aroma of coffee and the hum of conversation filling the air. Hugo stood behind the counter, chatting with a patron as he rang up their purchase. He looked up as the bell above the door jingled, his face brightening. "Evie," he called out. "Come to inspect the competition, have you?" "Not at all," she replied with a grin. "I wanted to see how your Scrooge display is coming along, and show you mine." Hugo gestured toward the front window. "Please, look. It's still a work in progress, but I think it's shaping up nicely." Evie approached the window, her breath catching at the sight of the display. Hugo had recreated the pivotal moment of Scrooge's redemption with stunning detail. The window featured a miniature Victorian dining table, set for a feast with tiny plates of faux roast goose and bowls of painted fruit. In the background, a painted backdrop of a snowy London street framed the scene, complete with flickering gas lamps fashioned from tea lights. But what struck Evie the most were the subtle details. A tall grandfather clock in the corner of the scene, its pendulum frozen mid-swing, a stack of gold coins spilling from a tiny bag as if symbolizing Scrooge's newfound generosity, and, tucked in the corner, a tiny black top hat, its placement almost too small to notice. "It's beautiful," Evie said sincerely, turning to Hugo. "You've outdone yourself." Hugo beamed, his cheeks reddening slightly. "It's not quite finished, but thank you. I wanted to capture the spirit of transformation, of moving from darkness to light." "It's perfect," Evie said, pulling out her phone. "Here, let me show you mine." She brought up the photo she'd taken and handed the phone to Hugo. His face lit up as he studied it. "Ah, the Ghost of Christmas Past. Whimsical and haunting. I love how you've incorporated the clock and the books. Very clever." "Thank you," Evie said, feeling a swell of pride. "I thought the clock tied in well with the theme." "It does indeed," Hugo said. "We've done quite well for ourselves, haven't we? The judges will have a tough decision this year." Just as Evie was getting ready to leave, the door jingled again, and 2 delivery men stepped in, each carrying a large box. Hugo's eyes lit up with delight as they set the boxes on the counter. "Ah, the shipment I've been waiting for," he exclaimed, his voice brimming with excitement. "Evie, you've come at the perfect time. I've been expanding my collection of rare and antique books." Hugo wasted no time opening one of the boxes, his hands surprisingly nimble as he pulled back the packing paper. Evie leaned closer, her curiosity piqued as he began pulling out books bound in faded leather and cloth, their spines adorned with gold lettering. "Look at this," Hugo said, holding up a particularly worn volume. an 1847 edition of Tennyson's poems. Exquisite, isn't it? It's beautiful, Evie agreed, running a finger lightly along the spine. Hugo continued unpacking, pausing briefly as he pulled out a small, weathered book with an embossed green cover. Ah, I remember this one. I had a copy of it a few months ago. Sold it to Mabel, actually. Evie's pulse quickened. What kind of book is it? An herbology guide, Hugo said, absent-mindedly turning it over in his hands. Very old, but quite comprehensive. Plants, their uses, medicinal properties, that sort of thing. I have another copy now, though, much better condition. He set it aside and turned back to the box, pulling out another treasure with a delighted murmur. Evie's thoughts, however, were spinning. Mabel had purchased a book on herbology months before Lizzie's death. A book that might have detailed the properties of monkshood. Would you mind if I bought this copy? Evie asked, her voice as casual as she could manage. I've been thinking about incorporating more plant lore into my soaps and lotions. Something like this would be perfect. Hugo looked up, surprised but pleased. Of course, I'll give you the friendly neighbor discount. Evie left Beans and Books with the herbology guide tucked safely in her bag, her mind racing as she made her way back to Silver Sage Naturals. She didn't even pause to remove her coat before dropping the book on the counter and flipping it open. The pages were thick and yellowed with age, the text written in small, precise script. She thumbed through the sections quickly, skimming past entries on lavender, yarrow, and elderflower until her eyes landed on a name that made her stomach twist. Aconitum napellus. Monkshood. The entry was detailed, spanning several pages. It described the plant's appearance, habitats, and most chillingly, its effects. The text outlined how even a small amount of the plant could disrupt the heart's rhythm, causing a sudden and often fatal cardiac arrest. Evie's hands shook as she closed the book. Mabel had access to this knowledge. She had owned this book for months. And Lizzie's death, so precisely orchestrated, seemed far too coincidental. As Spinks leaped onto the counter, rubbing against her arm, Evie whispered, Mabel, what have you done?